All right, let's go ahead and get kicked off here, get started. Hopefully everybody was able to join. Thank you guys for joining us this afternoon. We're here to talk about transportation business intelligence, the do's and don'ts of implementing a successful transportation BI program. Joined today by Brett and Gabrielle. Brett, you want to start? Quick introduction to yourself, your role at Corber, and Gabrielle, if you could do a quick introduction to yourself and your role at Urban. It'd be great to kick off the session.
Yep, can do. Thanks, Tony. Hey, everyone out there. My name is Brett Hamrick. I lead our BI and analytics group here at Kerber, formerly known as Invista's Freight Audit and Payment Asset. Was acquired on September 1st. But my primary responsibility here at Kerber is leading our BI and analytics group. So that happens on two fronts. We are responsible for enabling our customers' success through the data that we have flowing through under our Freight Audit and Payment partnership, and then also have a consultative operational analytical arm that is focused on driving cost savings reductions and improving that relationship that we have through the data, through our business intelligence tool with our shipper partners.
Great, thanks, Brett. Gabrielle, you want to go?
Of course. Hello, everyone. My name is Gabrielle Mirabito. Like Tony had said, I'm with Urban Outfitters. I am currently managing our supply chain team, so supply and operations planning. More relevant to the conversation today, I used to lead our outbound transportation department, so all of our digital, direct-to-consumer, e-com orders outbound from our fulfillment centers around North America, as well as our retail store fulfillment from our DCs into stores. So kind of in summary, managed our carrier relationships, worked really closely to own our delivery expense, all things outbound related.
Great, thanks. Myself, Tony Verrill, Director of Sales here at ProShip. I'll kind of be the moderator today as we tap into Brett and Gabrielle's subject matter expertise in this arena. Quick housekeeping as we go through the session here today, next half hour, 45 minutes. If you have any questions, please post them to the questions tab in the webinar app, as well as we will have a few poll questions that we'll get through for everybody. If you could please interact, that would help the conversation flow as well too. As we release the poll questions, there'll be two of them here as we go throughout the discussion today. Quick agenda, just run through really four major topics that we'll cover here today. Obviously, getting started with analytics. How do you set up a foundation to grow upon? Obviously, once you get the data moving, once you get some of the KPIs up and running, how do you make sense of that data? We'll talk to Gabrielle about the Urban case study as far as the use of analytics, and obviously the feedback analytics gave to transportation changes for Urban. And then we'll talk through what those metrics look like, how to maintain continuous improvement, but how to measure success most importantly. Obviously, if there's questions throughout the session today, we'll make sure we pause and be able to address those as we can, or we may leave them until the end as well to make sure we can get those answered. So really starting out, the question is, you need analytics. Brett, Gabrielle, if you could chime in on, where does someone start, knowing they need visibility, knowing that they want to get to an end goal of transportation, business intelligence, where do you start?
Yeah, I'll take the first stab at this, Gabrielle, and then feel free to chime in. You're the one that's actually implementing this and seeing the successes. But I think it starts out with identifying your desired outcomes. And we'll get to these three pieces here on the screen here shortly, but it may seem simple as you go into this, but that's really where it starts. And when we look at identifying those desired outcomes, it's important to look at, are we just looking at transportation spend, or how are we able to expand this to impact each department, each person, each stakeholder for those business outcomes that we're looking to impact throughout our entire organization. If we're just focused on transportation spend, we're probably starting too narrow, and then we want to expand that kind of footprint of our reach with this transportation data that we have, and what are those desired outcomes that we're looking to achieve. And then I think here shortly we'll start talking about these three different areas as to who you want to include, what you want to include, and what that process looks like.
Yeah, just jumping off what Brett has said is really just trying to understand what you want to get out of the BI tool and really what is essential for it to be successful as you move forward with it. For us here at Urban, we've always utilized Invista's BI tool for transportation, really started with outbound, so our delivery and freight, and then, integrate it with our inbound for imports. Um, and originally we used their MSI, so it was a lot of ad hoc reports, and then eventually realized that they had this BI tool that gave us the ability to create these analytic dashboards that really could tell the story, um, throughout your entire, relationship with them. So it's really trying to understand what you want to get out of the data that you have, that that's at your fingertips, and then really driving home what you want to do with it and what it's going to tell you with the BI.
Yeah. So saying too, like understanding what you want to get out of the data, that starts like super broad, but then that's where we start to say, okay, the first step is really let's identify who those stakeholders are. Who are the stakeholders that are impacted by this data? Is it finance? Is it e-commerce? Are we looking to impact our customer experience teams? Is it warehousing? Is it just purely transportation? As you start to identify the people who are going to be impacted by this data, that's how we start to set up kind of that framework of now what data do we want to start flowing into the system and make sure all of those voices are accounted for, even if we're just having introductory conversations to know we need to start considering what their needs are, because downstream, that's the last place that you want to be, is have a BI solution implemented and we have XYZ question come from finance department, or hey, it'd be great if I could see this level of data, and we go, man, we should have thought of that to begin with. We should have asked you guys up front.
Yeah, I think that is critical to bring the stakeholders together. I guess, Gabrielle, from your perspective, where was the largest, I guess, the voice, if you want to talk voice of the customer, voice of the business, if you will. I mean, where were the the stakeholders coming from an urban perspective? Obviously, critical to transportation supply chain, but what other departments were brought to the table for you guys to make sure you had all the voices heard?
Yeah, so like I'd said, is we really started with transportation, but here at Urban, we all fall under the umbrella of supply chain. So we have our supply chain finance, delivery, freight, logistics. Um, you have inbound, outbound. You have our like systems, so our WMS team. So those are really the key stakeholders for us. But then, even external with carriers that we work closely with, these tools also help us have a better relationship with them and kind of to help drive these conversations. And then even as well as with our brand stakeholders, I mean, ultimately something like our cost per package is impacting them as well, right? Like what, on the back end making money, what we're presenting to the consumer at checkout. So really for us is kind of working backwards. So understanding what this BI tool is going to get us and really who could look at that. And I think to Brett's point is this BI tool should be easy for other stakeholders, not just transportation or supply chain finance who's going in and looking at it every day, but for the other folks to understand, and then for anyone really to go in and get this useful information out of it in an easy manner. But for us is identifying those stakeholders, you kind of want to include everyone up front in the conversation. So you're not backtracking at the end, right? Like it's always better to have, I don't know, more of like a bigger picture. And then you can always, become more narrow and, builder down the views and stuff. But I think it's kind of include everyone up front. Um, and then you can make it more narrow, especially is because someone may look at something and have a totally different perspective from what they're pulling out or what the data is telling them, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, especially with almost more of a crawl, walk, run approach, right? You might not know what the data will tell you, or might raise more questions than it answers, especially in the early stages as you guys are rolling out KPIs and so on and so forth. So I guess, how did that upstream process, everybody coming together, how did that help the onboarding process? I think as we start talking about integrations and system rollout, getting to that end state, what does that onboarding process look like? And we'll circle back to the integration piece and bring all the data together. But Brett, you want to go into kind of the typical onboarding process that Corber goes through and some of the best practices, just getting started and making sure you have the data flowing to see the value as quickly as possible?
Yeah, definitely. And I think this does tie into the integration conversation as well, because that onboarding process, it's essential to understand what data you have flowing into this new system. And that's where it can get overwhelming, and we can kind of talk about what that process looks like. But it's important to understand really granularly what data elements matter to us that allow us to set up this ideal visibility environment. And then with those data elements, what are our common use cases? What are we using this for? Is it ad hoc reporting? Is it weekly reporting? Are we really looking to reduce spend from a kind of a spend mitigation or cost mitigation standpoint? Are we being tasked by that in the business? Is it developing this KPI program that allows us to tell the story of our transportation spend? I think as you identify those data elements that lead to those kind of core use cases, that sets up that onboarding process. Because if you just jump in and you start to try to build out dashboards with this mountain of data that you have at your fingertips, it's going to be pretty daunting. You're going to ask yourself, I don't really know where to start. And that's where, again, this integrations piece, knowing the data elements that you have coming into the system, a WMS, an OMS, track and trace, shipment execution software, those data elements power so much more than just what you get from your carrier integrations with your transportation spend. That then says and sets the stage. I know the data elements that are important to my stakeholders. I know where we need to get those data elements from. Now let's really learn what those data elements are and the story that they're going to tell us. And that's the onboarding flow that is kind of best practice or recommended.
Yeah, from a systems perspective, I mean, obviously you've got a ton of different data sets to bring into one tool to get to your KPIs, to get to your metrics that each stakeholder wants to get to. I think that kind of goes into having the right enterprise software stack, right? So having data to be able to be aggregated and then obviously be meaningful through an e-commerce team and their systems, order management, WMS, ERP, obviously transportation data through a multi-carrier system like ProShip. And then obviously you mentioned something that's critical probably for a lot of benchmarking and definitely for this crowd is going to be visibility data, right? Am I delivering on time, so on and so forth. So I think bringing those together really highlights, having all those tools in place and then knowing, I guess, which tool along the journey of an order probably is going to have the best data for you to bring together. Right. So, any tidbits, Gabrielle, as far as how you guys orchestrated all of your systems? Was there an aha moment to connect it all, or was it really just incrementally working through the integrations to get to the data feeds?
I think it was a little bit mixture of both. Like I'd said, we first started with Invista as more so of, for payments, like we would integrate our carriers with them to help with invoicing and payments on our behalf. And then we realized that they housed all of this data. They were integrated with our WMS system, that they had all of the data, and it was, data integrity was important to us as well. And then that's when we started to just have them run these ad hoc reports. And I don't think it was as, flexible as we had wanted, or it was time consuming on both parties. And that's when really they kind of brought to light the BI tool. And I think that's where the aha moment came, where it was, we don't have to do these ad hoc requests, or even if we do, how can we turn them into like real life dashboards? And I think that's really the steps that we have taken, and more so, the past 2 years really that I've utilized the BI tool, is that it did start with those ad hocs, but now utilizing the BI is we've created these into just real-time dashboards that we can go in, click on different filters and stuff like that and pull the information right away rather than waiting 15 minutes for a report to pull. Or it's like you ask for something, oh wait, can I look at this? Yeah, we have to go, back and rerun the report. If you have a dashboard, maybe it's just a filter that you click on. Very dynamic, which I know we'll talk about, a little bit later, but that BI provides that dynamic, which is really awesome and unique.
Hey, we all, especially in transportation, we love those tools that give us that flexibility, that agility for the business. Right? So moving on, I think we have a first poll question that we'll share. I want to make sure we've got everybody able to be submitting these. We'll give a minute or two here for everybody to select. The question is going to be, who are the primary stakeholders for the audience that you guys typically see are requesting data? Maybe you have manual processes for reporting or KPIs for. Just trying to get a better sense from the audience as far as where a majority of the BI analytics requests are coming from today. So we'll have this poll up for about another minute here and talk to some of the results before moving on. Great, interesting results. As we look at some of the results here, Brett, Gabrielle, anything stick out? I mean, obviously more of the corporate or more, heartbeat of the business. Anything, wrapping up the chain of command makes sense that that's the leader. I think the outlier I'll call out is more of the kind of e-com customer experience for that analytics, and it's a little bit higher than I expected. I guess any take from your side, Brett, for the poll responses?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good call out, Tony, and I think that's the place that a lot of transportation departments will typically hear a lot of noise from. So if we're not getting orders delivered on time, if our on-time performance relationships with our carriers are not being met, if our transit times are being delayed, products being delayed, et cetera, that typically leads to those customer complaints, those things that bubble to the top that can really impact impact a business. So it makes sense that this is on here. And I think that also speaks to why incorporating all of these different departments makes so much sense. Because if you have the right data elements, we're able to directly measure, monitor, and impact this customer experience in real time through the business intelligence tool. You get to see things like what's our expected delivery date versus our actual delivery date. If we have transit time data or track and trace data integrated into the system as well, you're able to see when things start to slow down, when orders may not be getting to particular areas or customers or regions of the country in time. And that information is just as important, especially now, almost just as important as that rising transportation spend piece of things, is that carrier commitment that we have to delivering excellence for the customers or whoever your end consumer is.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting on the cross-functional team as well too. I think that's ultimately what we're funneling towards as far as having these dashboards available to everybody and everybody's KPIs involved. It's good to see there's crossover as far as not just silos for this data as well too. So let's transition in the conversation. I think Gabrielle, you kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier here. You have all this data. It's integrated into a BI tool. Let's talk through some of those sources. Let's talk through some of the tactics on how to organize this, best practices around making sure that we are using this data in a combined fashion most appropriately. So, Brett, Gabrielle, any recommendations that you guys have as far as we started out, we've got the team together, we've got data flowing. What is the best approach for making sense of this data? Anything to avoid? Any lessons learned in trying to crunch the numbers?
Yeah, from a lessons learned perspective, I would say going at everything all at once. That's one lesson learned, and then the other lesson learned is being so narrowed on your focus to where you're using a platform like this for such a small, minute task or automation or requests that you do on a regular basis that you're not seeing the bigger picture. Those are two opposite ends of the spectrum, and the best part is to find that sweet spot. So how do you do that? Again, we kind of set the stage before. You got to know the data elements that are in there, and you got to know the business decisions that you're trying to drive down the road. And then that allows you to strategically set up this tool in a couple different ways. You need to know how quickly you can run reports to get information at your fingertips, because in the transportation world, you got to have answers yesterday when it comes to this stuff. You can't be waiting on reports. You can't be, hey, I need to go to my corporate IT to build out this report to figure out how to access this information. That takes too long. So you have to be able to build stuff out quickly. You want to be able to have a pulse on your supply chain. You want to keep a pulse on this, so you need to have dashboards that you feel comfortable jumping in, and like Gabrielle said, comfortable with other teams looking at them to where they can see the different KPIs that are set up that are important for measurement. And then you also want to have another space to where you can look at things holistically. Let's see where we can make operational improvements. What's driving our spend, and what can we do to look to make changes? That's not just a quick fix, not something that we're just checking the box because we saw, Larry in warehouse make a change on shipping next day AM shipments. We want to look at things more collectively, and having those 3 different buckets of how we set up this tool is very important to do so. And that's something to think about as you're starting out.
Yeah, I think to Brett's point is not like opening the floodgates right off the bat, right? Is like knowing that you have this, and especially with the company that you do integrate with, you have that relationship with them. And as much as your business is evolving and growing and developing, they are with you as well. So understanding that when you make changes in your network, they're also, staying up to speed with that. And I think that also helps it, but also is collecting that data, but cleaning it. So I don't know, Brett, if, you're picking up where I'm going with this, but a lot of like the coding and behind the scenes. So when we pass along, let's say like our PLD or manifest data, we have multiple different warehouses across the state. So like, bucketing that. So if it's this origin, this is like the node that it's coming from, the FC, like just cleaning your data to make it a little bit more concise and clear, not having, so much all over the place. Or what channel is it hitting? Is it hitting digital? Is it hitting retail? Is it hitting wholesale? So I think also coming with it is like cleaning the data. And again, you can do that, step by step. It doesn't have to be all at once. I mean, I know right now we're going through an audit with Invista of cleaning up our data and truing up, what we have, GL codes and all of that. So I think also having the ability and flexibility to do that, makes the tool go a long way.
You would think the input from all your different stakeholders, at the table probably helps, know where those anomalies lie, right? So, someone that's maybe in the tool, or they know exactly what that KPI is meant for, or how they want to use it. They know if it's just, off the mark a little bit, right? So maybe we could speak to some of that, maybe continuous feedback, if you will, as far as, organizing the data, making it make sense. And then I guess, like, what do you do with that data now that it does make sense?
Yeah, Gabrielle's harped upon this, and I really like this term. I may steal it and coin it for myself, but it's the dynamic decision making that you can use with this data. And the dynamic decision making, again, comes from setting up our data to where we can read and digest and understand it in a way that we can make quick business decisions based off of it. If it's not clean and it's not coming across in our, let's call it internal company lingo, things like channel, node, GL code, department, product information, box type information. I mean, we can keep going on and on about those specific data elements. It makes it challenging to glean more out of this information. So if we set up a KPI, and our primary goal for this business intelligence tool is to come in and just have visibility to that KPI and to say, our cost per package is $10.50 this month, it's $10.55 the next month. That's good. That is a great place to start, but you're leaving so much unturned if you don't have a business intelligence tool that allows you to start to peel back those layers, to start to dive into those specific data elements. And then there's your continuous feedback loop. You'll see something shiny over here that says, I'm interested in this. I want to dive into it a little bit further. What part of the data story is it telling me? And if that data is clean, you'll glean from it really quickly. And then now you can start to make those operational decisions based off of those KPIs, because we can directly say what's driving the numbers that we care about. Is it service level? Is it zone? Is it weights? Then we go further. Is it product type? Is it departments? Is it particular distribution centers? Is it particular channels that we're looking at? That's that continuous improvement cycle that always changes, because we know carriers are never going to be at a shortage for surcharges. They're never going to be at a shortage for rate changes. We're always going to be looking to bring in other carriers into the mix to be more competitive with our pricing. So as that dynamic environment continues to change, you've got to have a tool that can be set up that tells you that story. And then when you move the levers, what does that do? And what is the outcome of that? And how do we measure that outcome? That's kind of, as we get through the mountain of data, now we start to see those decisions that we can start to impact downstream.
Well, I think a critical point too that we talked about, this as part of the prep for today's session too, but it's not so much the weekly reporting or getting rid of the manual task of ad hoc reporting, as Gabrielle mentioned, but it's probably more of the cadence that you get this data, and then building it over time, probably helps you build to that holistic view, to where you can know where those levers and switches need to be pulled as well too. So without giving into too much of the case study here, Gabrielle, anything to mention from your side as far as bringing the data together, the KPIs, or kind of the downstream changes from the urban perspective?
Yeah, I think, what I'd mentioned in the beginning is, whatever visual you're looking at or story you're trying to tell, you want it to be like make it easy for other stakeholders to understand. If you're, sharing something about transportation, you want someone, even in the brands, right, to understand what you're telling. So it's more so of how do you create that for everyone, for all different perspectives to really understand. And maybe someone comes in and, like Brett had said, is okay, you see your cost per package, is increasing month over month. And, we may say, well, what's our like weight, look like month over month? Has it increased? Oh, is it a lot more packages are coming from this facility, and we're shipping more out of market? So I think is being able to drill down, and when you kind of present it to different stakeholders, they're all going to come up with different questions. So I think that's where the capabilities in the BI tool to just kind of like plug and play or filter gives you that like on the spot ready to kind of answer those questions, or to look at it at a whole different way.
It's almost essentially the blocking and tackling, right? So
Right.
the day-to-day blocking, tackling, dialing in, but then obviously extrapolating out for the larger trends. I think that's definitely critical for back to your point, Brett, the dynamic decision making, right? So the decision or the change you're going to elicit is going to differ based off what you're seeing, but also then the context you give it, right? So let's switch over, Gabriel, if we could pick on you here for a moment. Can you run through, as far as some of the use cases, how you guys saw some of this feedback loop, out and put it to use, put it to practice here, as far as findings in analytics, and then morphing the business to be continuously successful? Can you maybe
Right.
talk on some of that?
Of course. So I think that's where, we kind of go back to, you have all of this data, we've created these different dashboards. How is it going to eventually provide us with like actionable insights that like our business can make to just, implement more efficient business processes, or tell us more, something different that we didn't know. So for us with the BI tool and different use cases is that, we can go into something, a dashboard on a month-to-month basis, and it'll tell us the immediate like state of the company, right, that we're in. So like last month's CPP, for example, by this carrier, but then also what has happened in the past. So it's also driving into like we talked about, Brett and I just talked about, is like the month over month changes, is getting visibility into that. One thing that comes to mind, I know, we're talking about our delivery expense a lot, but that's something that really transportation had utilized a lot. And as we know, every year there's GRIs, there's different surcharges that pop up. There was COVID surcharges and peak surcharges that are all changing, your delivery expense. So for us, it was, let's just say we started with 2 DCs, and then now we're at 5 DCs. So now inventories all over the country. So inventory out of market shipments play a factor into it. We started looking at that. Now we know that, fuel, it's coming down a little bit, but that was a huge thing. That was a huge driver in our uptick in CPP, looking at that even year over year. So kind of building, for us, we had like a parcel like delivery expense. And before we were always looking at weight. Now we bring in zone. Now we're bringing in fuel. We bring in COVID surcharges. So we've just continuously built, and I would say probably the last year, like every month, like we would have these static meetings where we'd be like, hey, someone wants to look at this now. Can we add it in there? And that, adds another layer in, just more visibility to help us make these better, decisions. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I think the KPI is morphing over time, right? Going back to flexibility of the system, it probably isn't so much transportation, if that's really the subject matter expert or the stakeholder for this analytics. It probably is more of the changing, the shifting ground in the other areas of the business that'll always come back to that continuous feedback loop, right? So I think from a shipping perspective, multi-carrier shipping platform perspective, what we typically see is some of that cost mitigation you had mentioned, some of that delivery expectation versus reality. I think we saw it the last couple of years as far as on-time delivery and matching cost with on-time delivery or speed of a package. I think that was probably the number one thing I think ProShip had seen is enabling new carriers to mitigate some of those cost increases people have seen, year over year, month over month, quarter over quarter, but also then performance of carriers and being able to track those with analytics, be able to elicit changes in the system, whether it be routing, business rules, or even just carrier selection, rate shopping, seem to be some of the themes that we've seen from a ProShip perspective on our front. Brett, any other case studies that you've seen, very, I guess, popular themes or trends from the Corber side?
Yeah, popular themes and trends. I mean, what's happening in the marketplace right now is kind of telling the story of this rising cost. And that seems pretty generic, but I would be surprised to hear a lot of clients out there that are seeing their transportation spend going down as that's going on. And now we've got so much more attention from, I think that's why it was enlightening on our poll question. We see operations or corporate driving a lot of this usage. This is getting a lot more attention than it has previously as this mega cost center that it is. And I think the fun part of that, the flip side of that equation is, one, being able to tell the story accurately and tell what the drivers in this spend are. Is it fuel? Is it carrier negotiations? Is it accessorials that are driving it? Is it our strategy with our distribution center and our fulfillment strategy? Whatever that is, with these right data elements and these right integrations and the right partnerships that you guys are building, now we get to positively weaponize the story that we have to tell from a transportation side. We can go into these meetings and into these conversations and directly impact things from a positive standpoint on cost reduction. When it comes to the profitability of products, we want to be able to measure that. And how do you do that? You have to have the whole picture and have the whole picture flowing through BI. You want to know the success of your customers and how happy are they? How engaged are they with you through your delivery experience? And now through the right data challenges, we're able to tell that story, especially as we're going into peak. Carrier capacity is always going to be a concern and a huge conversation of getting stuff delivered on time. So if I had to say things that we're talking about right now, it's carrier capacity going into peak, and what does that strategy look like, and how do we impact that strategy? And then what's our surcharge mitigation strategy? Peak season surcharges have just been recently announced. How do we look to mitigate that even with the rising costs that we're seeing in other areas? Those would be the two most immediate ones.
Yeah, absolutely. With that, I believe we're up to our next poll poll question here for the audience. This one is a little bit more focused on measurement, right? What KPIs, or maybe where people are struggling getting analytics put together for. So just curious as far as where you're having the most trouble as far as measuring KPIs or measuring the business success or failure from a transportation analytics perspective. Keep this open here for a minute or two. Allow people to vote as far as the conversation here. All right, thanks for everybody who filled this out. Some interesting results here. I think a little bit of a mixed bag as far as across the board. Obviously, the large ones sticking out is the tech to connect it all. My initial take as far as the tech to connect it all or struggling with specific data feeds to analytics, it probably goes back to the larger conversation of the enterprise software stack. But Gabrielle, Brett, is some of that tied to what we talked about earlier as far as like getting all the data together can be a very I don't want to say cumbersome task, but you can get lost in all the data getting it together. But now, what are some incremental steps someone can work on just to get data flowing into analytics?
I'd say it's crawl, walk, run. I know we've been painting this big grandiose picture of all of these different data elements being integrated into your transportation data through a business intelligence tool. And quite frankly, that's the best way to go. But it's not the end all be all of the way to go to still be extremely successful. And it's starting with the transportation carrier data, seeing what that's telling you. And then if you're not sure what these questions are that you should be asking or what questions are coming from the data, as you start to set up some of these basic KPIs, you'll drill into it further. And then it's a one by one or step by step approach to start to integrate those other systems as we go through stuff. That's a very common approach that people take that they become successful with.
I think also to all of our points, it can be very overwhelming at first, right? Like you have this new shiny tool that you can use and you think that you can put in all the data in the world that you have into it. But I think like to Brett's point is maybe start small. Like for instance, like when Urban started, it was just outbound transportation. And I mean, like, look at where we're at now. Our whole transportation imports is, integrated with them from carriers, final mile carriers to line haul carriers. So I think, don't overwhelm yourself to start. If this is completely new to you and your company, is you can start small. And again, you can build upon it. And the more that you get used to it and the more that you see what you can get out of it, like the more things pop into your head and you pose the questions of like, oh, can we see this? How do we see this? Or what can this tell us? And then you can continue to layer on. So I don't think you kind of have to, again, run with it to start. You can start small and then build upon it as you can see what it does. And if it is successful and is helping you make those better business decisions, then kind of build upon that.
Yeah, absolutely. So as part of measuring the success, let's wrap up with kind of how do we measure the success, the feedback loop. This actually probably goes to this probably goes back to a question we got submitted by the audience here during this. Is like, aside from the better data and visibility, like what are some other outcomes that Urban has been able to see from business analytics? So back to the feedback loop, how has that changed rate shop groups or carriers? Have you brought on carriers? Have you gone back to the negotiation board? Could you speak to maybe having that data available to you during negotiation, what that benefit has? Could you talk to maybe just something more specific as far as what that feedback looks like for an Urban perspective? And then obviously, Brett, any other client use cases that come to mind of that feedback loop?
I think that, you are hoping that the BI or whatever dashboard you have or report that you've created or analysis is, going to tell you something that you take and you run with it and you implement it in your business as a new strategy, but it's also like helping you discover and identify some of the gaps or main drivers into like an increase in costs you're seeing. So not only is it, maybe giving you the answer you're looking for, but also helping you understand like what you might have been missing or not always looking at. And I think with the different BI tools is to help you understand trends as well. Um, you know, your business is constantly evolving and changing. So like, how is that impacting, transportation or finance or logistics, right? So they have your historics, they have current data. So really is they can paint the picture of, where you were 2 years ago to where you are now, especially in the e-com world. I'm sure we all know is, pre-pandemic, online shopping is not what it is now. So even comparing back to 2019 to, 2020 to now, I think that also is like the feedback loop is that it gives you visibility into the past as well to help you make better, informed decisions into the future.
Absolutely. As part of that, keeping the pulse in your supply chain continuous improvement, Brett, could you talk through maybe some of the, varying levels of continuous improvement, right? There's got to be some quick wins, but also that strategic view, extrapolating it out. Those are probably more long-term wins. Could you speak to kind of breaking those down as well too for measuring success or, continued improvement?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it breaks down into a number of different ways. Like you said, there's low-hanging fruit that's out there if we now have this visibility that we previously didn't have. We're able to isolate accessorials. We're able to isolate rogue service level spend. We're able to isolate and compare distribution center performance across each other and understand what the drivers are of that performance. I mean, you name it, you've got the right data elements in play. The right tool is going to unlock this visibility for you immediately. Now, downstream is where we start making bigger, larger business decisions and start to impact things that are not just cost mitigation from a charge perspective with our carriers. We start talking about gaining operational control. Now that we have an understanding over our finance spend, now we're able to gain control over that operationally to start to put in best practices when we're working with vendors, suppliers, departments, and understanding that picture. We're also now way more educated as we go into our carrier QBRs. So Tony, you started to hit on it as well. We have all these different carriers now that we're rate shopping against each other. We're bringing more carriers to the table and we're understanding this environment better. How can we use the data that we have in the tool to impact that stuff positively, especially from an on-time performance and time and transit perspective? Those are two differing stories that you'll get when you are working on those fronts, and you want to be equipped with information that helps you have a positive conversation. And then also, it's the cost reduction strategy overall. As we start to get things like SKU level detail into a platform like this, understanding our entire, total landed cost of a product, and how do we coordinate with our marketing department on our checkout experience. With how we price that. How do we work with our sales team with pricing a particular item now that our GRI with FedEx just gets announced and it's going to go up 6.9%? Are we accounting for that in our future strategy? Those are the those are the kind of type of projects that you start with. But once you implement it, you want to measure it through the tool too. And that's the really cool part that Gabrielle talked about, is measuring this stuff year over year. Measuring these things month over month. When we implement a change, we knew September 28th, we put a change in place operationally or contractually. Let's start to track that over time and quantify what that is so we can go tell that story to the business as to what we're doing to reduce cost. Those are the successes that we like to start seeing that are, it's great. We want to reduce address corrections. Low hanging fruit. We can identify that right off the bat. But these are the bigger picture items that become really important that, again, with the right tool, the right data partnerships, and the right people involved in the conversations, you can start impacting those decisions.
Great. Yeah, just to wrap up here today, we're almost at the hour. Give everybody just a minute or two. Any follow-up questions from the audience here that we can help address? If not, we will wrap up. we'll give everybody a minute or two and circle back. Did want to mention, obviously, any follow-up questions to ProShip, to Corber, to Gabriella. You could find her on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to us. Brett, we do have a session coming up at Parcel Forum in 2 weeks. Do you want to talk about that session and maybe plug attendance for that in-person session at Parcel Forum?
Yeah, we do. We also have an excellent panelist who's going to be on here with us as well. Gabrielle will be presenting on this at Parcel Forum with myself and Michael Falls. Gabrielle, Covetris, Todd Worthington at Covetris, and Tim Orsega from GNC will be at Parcel Forum, and we're going to dive in more to the success stories of these shippers through the business intelligence tool. We kind of talked today about the landscape and how do we set the right landscape, get the right data elements coming through, but really start to dive in. What are the successes? What are the benefits? What are the wins that Gabrielle started to touch on? And really, how do we start to quantify and build that? So Parcel Forum, yeah, please stop by and see us.
Great. I believe we covered all the questions. Obviously, if anything comes up, feel free to reach out after the session. Thank you, Gabrielle. Thank you, Brett. I really appreciate your time and the conversation, and hope everybody has a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.